In December of 1944, most New Yorkers had reason to celebrate. Their beloved Giants were playing well, and many felt that the war with Germany would soon be over. Secretly, however, President Roosevelt had been alerted by U.S. spies that Germany had been working on plans for an intercontinental weapon capable of reaching New York City. Roosevelt shared his concerns with New York City's mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia. In a public radio address, LaGuardia would try to alert the citizens of New York City without causing widespread panic.
Every man, woman, and child must know what to do and when to do it in the event of an attack by a foreign enemy. We must all make sacrifices, but we are going to win this war.
Mayor LaGuardia's optimism ran high, but at the time, New Yorkers had no idea that the Germans were planning a horrific attack on their city. The Germans, of course, never did bomb New York City, but the plan to do so was real, very real. By 1944, nearly 2 million tons of bombs had already fallen on Germany, compliments of the American 8th Air Force and British Bomber Command. Sir Arthur Harris was in charge of the British bombers. His insistent goal was to bomb Germany back to the Stone Age. He was well on his way.
Now for the Americans. As a nation, marshalling yards with the target at Ansbach, every day of this air offensive, they carried out Eisenhower's order to wipe out German railways.
Germany no longer had the ability to stop the growing number of American bombers coming in from England. German pilots and their aircraft had been greatly reduced nearly 3 years earlier during their failed Battle of Britain. Sir Arthur Harris's counterpart in Germany was Field Marshal Hermann Göring, head of the German Luftwaffe and second in command to Adolf Hitler. A World War I ace with more than 20 downed aircraft to his credit, he was not only fighting the Allies, but a strong addiction to morphine. Göring spent hours at a time gazing at his collection of masterpieces, stolen from all over Europe by the Nazis.
As Hermann Göring slipped deeper and deeper into his morphine addiction, the activities of his Luftwaffe were being taken care of by a group of senior officers who called themselves the Club. The leader of this club was a highly intelligent, highly decorated, very daring officer by the name of Oberst Siegfried Knemeyer.
Knemeyer was a pilot's pilot. He loved aviation and was well respected among the Luftwaffe elite. In the 30s, he took to the skies in German sailplane competitions. Most German pilots honed their skills in the same manner because post-World War I, Germany was forbidden to have an air force. But in the fall of 1944, he knew something drastic had to be done to avoid the unthinkable, a total and unconditional surrender.
Another milestone in the United Nations march to victory was reached when the British Army rolled into Belgium. The liberation of this nation broke the shackles that enslaved the Belgian people during 4 years.
Adolf Hitler ordered his men to fight to the end. Meanwhile, the flying bomb called the V-1, also known as Vengeance Weapon No. 1, continued to unleash its terror over England.
Civilians and civil defense services did valiant rescue work without regard to danger.
More than 2,000 of these buzz bombs had been sent over the English Channel, killing over 6,000 British citizens. The Germans were also using the new V-2 rocket, but these bombs were too small to make a real difference. Hitler and Göring then discussed their desires to strike the United States with something much more lethal. Knemeyer's job was to put a plan in motion.
It was Knemeyer's plan to come up with an aircraft capable of bombing New York City. Now, it was going to take an unusual aircraft because of the range required. The range between Germany and New York City was 3,500 miles. They wanted this aircraft to make a round trip. That's 7,000 miles. When you add in a couple more thousand miles for safety, you're looking at perhaps as much as 10,000 miles, 12,000 mile range. Kneemeyer looked at the existing aircraft manufacturers in Germany at the time, Ernst Heinkel, William Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, Dornier, and brought them into a conference. He said he wanted an aircraft capable of delivering a single bomb to New York City, but making a round trip of 7,000 miles plus safety. William Messerschmitt said it couldn't be done. Ernst Heinkel says it couldn't be done. They all told Kneemeyer it could not be done. We do not have an aircraft that will even reach New York City, let alone fly over New York City and make a round trip.
Disappointed by the conventional aircraft manufacturers, Kneemeyer dismissed the men. The problem was range. Conventional multi-engine bombers just couldn't carry enough bombs or fuel. Refueling wasn't an option because the logistics of the plan made it next to impossible. Kneemeyer realized that if they did figure out a way to reach New York City, they would be limited to carrying a single bomb. That bomb would have to be something just short of extraordinary. Soon, the German High Command would begin to sow the seeds of terror weapons. The Nazis were determined to succeed in the game of radioactive warfare. In 1944, the citizens of New York had no idea that the Nazis had them in their sights. The weapon, something straight out of science fiction.
We knew that Hitler had a plan that involved some sort of radiated bomb. He had talked about it from time to time in public speeches, where he called it his V4, and that he said it was a device so powerful that it could kill every living thing within 2 to 5 miles. We also know that Göring and Hitler were talking about this device, and so we have to assume that Kneemeyer also knew the wishes of his Führer through Göring.
The bomb to be dropped on New York City is only conventional in terms of weight, approximately 5,000 pounds. The plan was to wrap the transatlantic bomb with radioactive sand and have it explode high above the city. It's assumed that Hitler's radiated bomb would have been what weapons experts call a dirty weapon, not an atomic bomb, but a bomb that spreads radioactive fallout.
If that bomb had been airburst over the city at maybe 10 to 15,000 feet, then the radioactive sand or silica encasing the bomb itself would have been able to spread, particularly if released somewhat upwind, far and wide over the city. Depending on the degree of irradiation of the material surrounding the bomb casing and how many people were exposed to it at the time of explosion, it may not have killed a lot of people, but it may have made people very sick. And it's hard to predict what the total result would have been. As a political weapon, in order to sue for peace, to sue somehow for a more favorable outcome for Germany.
The results would be someone else's problem. At the time, Kneemeyer had another hurdle. None of the German plane manufacturers could offer him a way to deliver his deadly radioactive vengeance weapon. So Kneemeyer sought assistance from the military insiders in the club. He also knew several men in the fringe of aerospace research at the time, not all of whom had been embraced by the conventional aviation industry.
One was an old friend named Reimer Horten. Reimer Horten had designed all-wing sailplanes beginning in the 1930s. In fact, Siegfried Kneemeyer had a favorite Horten aircraft that he flew from time to time. Siegfried Kneemeyer also turned to a rocketeer by the name of Eugen Sänger. At one time, Eugen Sänger had proposed a piloted, reusable, suborbital bomber. The third person he had asked for an America bomber, as Siegfried was calling it, was Wernher von Braun. Wernher von Braun had the V2 rocket that he had perfected at Peenemünde. Kneemeyer was hoping with these three individuals in a competition that one of the three would come up with a flying machine that would serve his needs.
Nature has reclaimed most of the remnants of the plan to bomb New York City. Here on the Baltic Sea is the town of Peenemünde, once known as Rocket City. It was here that Wernher von Braun, one of the three competitors, would do most of his development work on the America bomber. World War II author and historian David Myra has spent 20 years researching Germany's secret plans to bomb New York City. He's come to Peenemünde in hopes of uncovering more information about the men and machines involved in this horrific plan. Today, David surveys the premises with Peenemünde curator Peter Proffer. They're looking for clues to determine the exact location of one of von Braun's launch pads.
More bomb craters all through here. The whole area is pockmarked. Most of these craters then are from the British when they bombed Peenemünde in August of 1943.
Yes.
Germany's desperate bid to bomb New York City with a radioactive bomb pit three teams in fierce competition with one another. One was brothers Reimer and Walter Horten, sailplane designers, who would eventually refer to the plan as the devil's work. Rocket engineer Eugen Sänger, an Austrian by birth, was simply looking for a way to further his desires to get into space. Only Wernher von Braun seemed to embrace the project with great enthusiasm.
Wernher von Braun came from a very wealthy, academic-oriented family. Highly educated, highly motivated. His father and mother had instilled in him a sense of passion for whatever endeavor he chose to pursue. Wernher von Braun was interested in rockets from the age of 17.
The young von Braun was maturing at a time when Germany was anxious to exploit the talents of anyone who could help them get ahead in the arms race. What they desperately wanted was a long-range rocket. Von Braun wanted to impress, and he did in the early 1930s by sharing the results of his latest rocket experiments with the German Army.
So impressed were these Army officers, so impressed were they with von Braun, that they offered him employment. Join the Army, and we'll help you further your education. Join the Army, and we'll allow you to go after your PhD. Wernher von Braun became a member of the Peenemünde rocket experimental test site.
Peenemünde is located on an island in northeastern Germany. The Luftwaffe began constructing it in 1936. Here, von Braun would finally see the scientific labs, wind tunnels, and infrastructure needed to do serious research on rockets. As a result, it would become known as Rocket City, as well as the birthplace of von Braun's deadly V-2 rocket.
In late 1944, Wernher von Braun had reasonably perfected his V-2 rocket. They were starting to shoot it against England with some success. Eventually, they would kill some 6,000 British citizens from V-2 rocket attacks. Von Braun and his boss, General Walter Dornberger, were never satisfied with a 200-mile range of the V-2. They were always seeking ways to increase the range of the V-2 rocket. Von Braun had spoken many times about hitting New York City, 3,500 miles away. So von Braun was thinking long range. He was thinking about a flying machine that was capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean. And he had mentioned many times that he had a rocket system called the A9 with a booster called the A10 that could hit New York City from anywhere in Germany.
But von Braun was about to face stiff competition and sabotage as the Nazi plan to bomb New York was getting even more desperate. Wernher von Braun's plans to convert a V-2 rocket into a weapon to hit New York weren't even off the ground when he learned of his two competitors. They had their own ideas about how to go the distance. Walter Horten had been a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain before being transferred to Fighter Command in Berlin. Walter was a tireless promoter of his younger brother Reimer's all-wing aircraft designs. It was also Walter who convinced Knemeyer that a fighter featuring an all-wing configuration would be more effective against the American P-51 Mustang. Knemeyer rewarded the brothers by providing empty government buildings on the edge of Göttingen in central Germany. It was here that Reimer Horten went to work on his first military aircraft, a twin-turbojet all-wing fighter. Today, the ivy-covered buildings still look much the way they did in 1944. Now the buildings are used for Autobahn maintenance. 87-year-old Alfred Deutsch remembers working with Reimer Horten. It was in these same buildings that he spent many days laboring on the secret all-wing aircraft. He remembers the workers having great faith in Reimer's designs at a time when Germany's destiny was uncertain.
Aber nur so von außen, ne?
He also recalls a boss with a kind heart.
He was very good to us, and he always took care of us. If we had any problems, he was always ready to do something for us. But he also wanted us to work very hard.
First I heard about the Hortens was I saw a photo of the Horten 5, and I asked, what is it, a kind of plane? It looks very modern. And my dad told me this is 50 years ago. My grandpa was working with the Horten brothers here in Göttingen.
In a field just a stone's throw from the Horten brothers' headquarters, Ronald Schmidt flies a radio-controlled all-wing Horten design.
You asked me about what the Hortens thought about war and stuff like that. I think they only used the military thing to construct their own planes and to flying planes.
The Horten brothers felt that their all-wing design was much more efficient than other planes being used at the time. Because it had no tail, the all-wing design had less drag, and that meant flying further with less fuel consumption than conventional aircraft. Knemeyer also came to the conclusion that an all-wing configured bomber may in fact be perfect for delivering a radiation-spreading bomb to New York City. When Knemeyer gave Horten orders for the America bomber, Reimer Horten was still working on his H-09 fighter. Even today, the images of these designs reflect the most advanced aircraft of the 21st century.
The creation of the fighter plane was an evolutionary development leading toward the development of the America bomber, which was to be powered by 6 turbine engines. And the reason that the Horten brothers felt this aircraft would be able to reach the United States was that the flying wing as a design had no fuselage or tail assembly. This made it roughly 20 to 30% more efficient. And if they could design an airframe that held enough fuel, they felt that they'd be able to reach the United States, successfully bomb either New York or Washington. And to be able to return, perhaps not all the way to Germany, but at least to some friendly territory. You don't kill the delivery vehicle with the dropping of the bomb as you do with a missile.
Perhaps even less known than the Horten brothers was Eugen Sänger. In the early 30s, Sanger was inspired by the first Rocketeers, who dreamed of using manned rockets to explore outer space and the moon. He was also inspired by the German films depicting huge rocket ships reaching the unexplored corners of our solar system. Sanger had emigrated to Germany from Austria in 1937 to pursue his dreams of traveling to space.
Initially, Eugen Sänger's research work was into a commercial rocket transport that could fly between Tokyo and Berlin, between New York City and Berlin. However, that was all scrapped as soon as Hitler declared war on Poland. Being an opportunist, Eugen Sänger felt if I could somehow change this commercial transport into an orbital rocket bomber, I could continue my research.
By the time Sanger had a chance to convert his rocket plane design into a true America bomber, it was late 1944. Sanger's suborbital bomber was unique in several ways. For one, his vehicle was reusable and employed a revolutionary launch system.
Eugen Sänger's idea for a horizontally launched rocket plane was novel, brand new, fresh. It was reusable. It could be set up any place. It didn't require the thousands of people it required to launch a V-2 rocket. Sanger's horizontally launched rocket could be done with several hundred people. And the turnaround time was in matters of hours, not days, as von Braun's A9, A10 combination would require.
This sled device would have been powered with up to about 15 of the V2 engines that Wernher von Braun had developed. So the sled would have had to contain tankage for large amounts of fuel to push this sled down the track to power the bomber, which was attached to it, up to a speed of around 1,200 miles an hour.
As the bomber reached a point near the end of the track, the vehicle would pull away from a jet-powered sled. It would remain unpowered for just a few moments before an onboard engine designed by Sanger himself would kick in.
And it would have burned an onboard load of fuel weighing about 90 tons and pitched up to about a 60-degree climb angle and remained under powered flight for approximately 3 to 4 minutes until the fuel was exhausted. At that point, the aircraft would pitch over, and because of its forward speed and centripetal force, would go into what is in effect a low Earth orbit at roughly 115 to 120 mile altitude.
It would also be a major technological breakthrough. At roughly 100 feet long and with a 40-foot wingspan, the craft was designed for hypersonic flight, which meant it could achieve a speed in excess of 3,800 miles per hour.
And somewhere over Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this bomb internally in the bomb bay would be released in a ballistic arc designed to hit New York or Washington, D.C.
Unique and revolutionary, Sanger's design may also have been too far ahead of its time. Unlike von Braun's concept, he didn't have the benefit of a proven working component like the V2. Sanger also had political problems.
In Wernher von Braun's eyes, Eugen Sänger, the Austrian, was not equal to him nor his fellow rocketeers in Germany. He looked upon Eugen Sänger with disdain. He believed Eugen Sänger could not possibly come up with a rocket flying machine that could hit New York City, let alone fly around the globe and land back in Germany again.
The competitors continued to work on their dream machines. Soon they would face sabotage and fatal accidents. The Nazi plan to bomb New York was about to claim thousands of innocent lives. Eugen Sänger and the Horten brothers' plans for machines that could strike New York City were certainly ambitious, testing the limits of aerodynamic theory. But von Braun was convinced that his was the correct plan.
Wernher von Braun had a very simple plan. He was going to take one of his V2 rockets. He was going to take out the warhead and put a human in there, a pilot. In order to get the range, von Braun was going to create a booster rocket called the A10. With 200,000 pounds of thrust. That would lift the V2 off the launch pad with the pilot in there, take it up about 40 miles, and that way von Braun could reach New York City 3,500 miles away. Wernher von Braun's plan to bomb New York City would have been virtually a kamikaze flight, and Wernher von Braun didn't care. Anyway, the pilot would never have survived a bailout of that A9 rocket. because it would be coming in to New York City approaching 3,000 miles per hour. There was no way anyone could get out of that rocket plane.
Wernher von Braun, the Horten brothers, and Eugen Sänger were racing against the clock, each other, and an aggressive Allied advance.
The crossing of the Rohr River was a preliminary step before we assaulted the Rhine at Remagen.
All three were loyal to Germany, but each had ulterior reasons for working on the America bomber. One obstacle they all faced was Germany's increasing lack of resources.
At that time, Germany was really in a desperate position because the war was nearing an end. Kurt LeMay's strategic bombing philosophy for the Americans was very effective. It was taking out ball bearing plants, synthetic fuel plants, railroad marshalling yards, and just completely interdicting the Germans' capability to conduct war. So the resources that the Horten brothers needed were becoming increasingly diminished. They just couldn't get what they needed. They couldn't get aluminum, so they were building their airplanes out of wood. They were having difficulty getting engines because the Germans couldn't produce turbine engines because of the lack of high-temperature alloys to put into the turbine blades. And so it was harder and harder to make war and to build these aircraft.
At the secret Rocket City in Peenemünde, von Braun was experiencing his own troubles. The British had broken the secret German radio codes that revealed the existence of a testing facility.
We knew about the developments in Peenemünde both by aerial photography, which probably was ordered as a result of our intercepting message traffic about what was going on there.
Then the Allies targeted von Braun's test facility and put the rocket scientists out of business. After several bombing missions, Peenemünde was mostly rubble. However, some of the buildings managed to escape undamaged. Today, a museum occupies the former coal plant that provided electricity to the base. Rusting remnants of Hitler's vengeance weapons still litter the site.
This is what's left of the facility that produced the liquid oxygen for the V-2 rocket and later for the A-9 and the A-10 America bomber.
Even after the punishing bombing, von Braun continued with his plans to build the America bomber as well as mass production of the V-2. Only this time the operation was moved to underground caves in central Germany's Harz Mountains, beyond the reach of Allied bombers. Von Braun's labor pool was made up primarily of slaves from concentration camps.
In 1 month, some 17,000 prisoners in Odora labor camps producing the V-2 rocket had lost their lives from maltreatment, malnourishment, and just a harsh, restrictive environment to work in. Wernher von Braun apparently didn't care, because he never talked about this. In his memoirs, made no reference to it. But he knew about it. He was there, seeing that his rockets were being mass-produced for the Führer.
The prisoners would, however, extract some degree of revenge.
There were stories, for example, in the control systems of these rockets, highly delicate gyro stabilizers, where the Polish underground, the slaves from Russia and Poland and elsewhere, would urinate on this delicate electronic equipment, and after a few days it would corrode. So the rockets, if they were shot off a week later after being mass-produced, they would go out of control and crash. It's estimated maybe a third of the rockets sent against England ever made it there. They would blow up in the air, have air bursts, or they'd go completely out of control and go into the English Channel and explode there.
Despite the sabotage of the V-2, von Braun had extreme confidence in his plan for the America bomber. He felt his calculations of the trajectory proved it was indeed possible to hit the United States. In late 1944, he had added wings to the V-2 and in December had test-flown the A-4B, as he was calling it. It was really the A-9, but the name was meant to confuse the Allied spies. Von Braun knew more testing was needed, but the bombing in Peenemünde had leveled the wind tunnels. Meanwhile, the Horten brothers were having troubles with their all-wing aircraft. The H-09 jet fighter was nearing completion. It was a time-consuming effort with more than 100 people laboring in small workshops. However, the hard work had paid off, with several successful flights of the Horten 9 in December of 1944. But 2 months later, on a cold winter day, all that changed. The Horten flight crew arrived at the snow-covered Oranienburg airfield just outside of Berlin, where the strange-looking jet was rolled out of its hangar and into the morning light. Test pilot Erwin Ziller strapped himself into the cockpit and made his last-minute checks. The two Junkers jet engines fired up and the craft roared into the air. But as Ziller returned to the field, suddenly one of the turbojet engines lost power and flamed out. The pilot desperately tried to restart the engine as the craft began to spin. With no stabilizers to compensate for the lost engine, Ziller fought to regain control. The ground crew watched in horror as the plane dropped from the sky and slammed into the ground, instantly killing its pilot. Reimer was devastated at the loss of his friend. Nevertheless, shortly after the crash, Goering ordered that 40 of the craft be produced.
Without expressing definite optimism, Allied leaders say the final curtain is about to fall on the European war.
Soon the Allies would be on the advance, and the three competitors would be seeking asylum. North of Hanover, Germany, in the dense pine forests, Eugen Sänger worked day and night. He spent most of his time in a cloak of secrecy. Even high-ranking German officials didn't know the details of his mission, or, for that matter, the fact that the research complex even existed. The secret facility still stands today. And on this day, a very special guest has arrived to meet with historian David Myra. His name is Hartmut Sanger, the son of Eugen Sänger. To him, these buildings symbolize much of the enigma and secrecy that has always surrounded his father. Hartmut remembers his father as a man with only one ambition in life, and it had nothing to do with bombing New York City.
Oh, my father was a man who was never at home. He and my mother, for they have been both researchers. His dreams has been to travel to far space. He wanted to develop the technology to realize this, to go to orbit, and from orbit to go with the relativistic effect of Einstein to the next stars. This was a model my father designed in 1938. It was the first hypersonic model. Hypersonic means it was for speeds about Mach 5, about more than 6,000 kilometers an hour.
Three different designs, employing technologies still under development, eventually may have given Hitler what he hoped would be a stunning blow to the United States and a last desperate chance to win the war. A radioactive bomb detonated over an unsuspecting New York City. But Hitler's plans were not going well, and the three principal contestants charged with building the America bombers were now more concerned with saving themselves. But when the end seemed imminent, Alfred Deutsch recalls a more relaxed working environment.
In the last days, we got holiday passes, so we have no problems with SS when we left the worksite. And so we got holiday passes from the war.
In contrast, for von Braun, the final weeks of the race were spent under more extreme conditions.
Wernher von Braun evacuated Peenemünde in April of 1945. The Russians were approaching. There were fear that they would overrun Peenemünde.
Von Braun and his group of rocketeers fled to a location just outside of Munich. They decided to wait there, hoping the Americans would reach them first.
They did not want to surrender to the British for fear that they might be charged as war criminals. They certainly didn't want to be captured by the Russians. So they said, we'll wait for the Americans to arrive. The Americans came, and they voluntarily surrendered.
In September of 1945, von Braun and his fellow scientists were flown to the United States in Operation Paperclip, a code name for a plan that would round up Germany's most elite scientists.
Wernher von Braun and his group helped the American military understand the workings of the V-2 rocket, taught them how it functioned, helped them improve its systems, its operating efficiencies. All this was done under the military's watchful eyes.
Meanwhile, the Horten brothers were also frantically looking for a safe haven.
At the end of the war, Reimer and Walter also were worried about being captured by the Russians. Their desire was, if anybody, they prefer to be captured by the Allies.
They got their wish. In fact, an offer was extended by the Americans to both brothers to come to the United States and continue their development efforts. Instead, Reimer Horten decided they would join some fellow countrymen who were fleeing to Argentina.
He was employed there in the development of a series of aircraft. He continued both his sailplane development and also the creation of a large 4-engine piston-powered transport flying wing design, which actually flew. It was not successful commercially.
At war's end, Eugen Sänger decided his best bet was to flee across the border to France. There, he would accept an offer from the French to work on the promising supersonic ramjet engine. After several years of working in France, Sanger would find himself embroiled in a controversy from which he would never fully recover.
It is alleged that Eugen Sänger, when he left France, took along with him rocket plans that he took to Nasser of Egypt, and Nasser of Egypt had plans to develop this into an offensive rocket against Israel. The Israeli intelligence found out about Eugen Sänger's consulting work with Nasser and made it public.
That bit of news left Sanger with nowhere to turn. The only work he could find would be giving lectures to students at the University of Berlin.
He became sick from this, for he was always struggling for his idea to go to space, and he wanted to make this without politics. He just was an engineer and wanted to realize his ideas.
Ironically, it was Sanger's chief competitor, Wernher von Braun, who 15 years after defecting to the United States would receive a phone call with an opportunity that Sanger had waited for his entire life. It was a way to turn a weapon of mass destruction into a vehicle of man's greatest triumph.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It was an event that nearly every citizen in the United States took great pride in. Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. What many Americans don't know is that Wernher von Braun and his group of rocketeers got us there. Von Braun was the designer of the Saturn V, the world's largest and most powerful rocket.
This is Wernher von Braun's finest hour.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, David. I can't imagine anything with this much power.
From 1945 to about 1965, this machine, this flying machine, generated 7.5 million pounds of thrust.
It's amazing to think, though, David, with just a little more time, I think the Horten brothers might have achieved their goal, too.
The Germans' goal, of course, was to drop a radioactive bomb over New York City. Ironically, far more Allied bombs fell on the German facilities intended to construct that bomb. After 30 minutes of driving through Peenemünde, in an area closed off to the public because of the danger of undetonated bombs, Myra and his guide finally find what they've been searching for.
This is Wernher von Braun's test stand for the V-2 rocket. It would have been his test stand for the American Bomber project as well.
Launch pad number 7, the birthplace of spaceflight, where in October of 1942, Wernher von Braun's V-2 rocket reached an altitude of nearly 50 miles, becoming the first man-made object in space. Less than a mile from Launch Pad 7 is a massive gravesite and memorial, serving as a constant reminder of those who lost their lives at Peenemünde. Though Peenemünde may be known as the birthplace of spaceflight, it's also known as the birthplace of Hitler's vengeance weapons.
Were the German people ruthless? I think it's important here to perhaps create a distinction between the leadership of the country at that time, which wanted to win the war at all costs, and the general population of the country, which perhaps initially may have been against the war and the Nazi Party because they seized power in such almost an underhanded way. And I think that perhaps there may have been a distancing between the general German population and the military and political leadership of the country.
But no one could distance themselves from the wishes of the Fuhrer.
Who walked away as a winner in the competition among the three men vying for the challenge of reaching the United States? In a limited way, it was probably Wernher von Braun, because he had success with the development of the V-2.
According to his son, Sanger's suborbital bomber was at least 20 years from being a reality when Germany surrendered. It's Alfred Deutsch's opinion that the Horten brothers were also 2 years from completing their version of the America bomber at war's end. It was Hitler's twisted mind that conceived the idea to bomb New York City. His strategy was to terrorize the population into submission. His pawns, 3 teams of talented designers. They began with the pursuit of aviation and space exploration, but capitalized on the America bomber plan to further their own selfish goals. In a way, the participants of the plan to bomb New York City drew the first blueprints of global terrorism.